I would want to, because I don't want to this early run into a protocol problem, stand on the already established protocol by my Lord Bishop, but I will also crave the indulgence of my Lord Bishop. I heard him say that the lecture is being broadcast live by, I can see channels here and AIT. So I crave the indulgence of the Synod to please permit me to recognize a very special group of persons that are not physically here present, but who are watching on YouTube about 11,000 kilometers away. It is 5 a.m. now, and my beautiful wife and 2 daughters are awake, watching Daddy. So I can look into the camera and say, Obidia, Dada and Zizi, Daddy loves you. Pray for me. When my Lord Bishop asked me to deliver this year's Synod lecture, I raised a slight objection at first. I told him that I was neither a pastor nor a politician. But he gave me that gentle, disarming smile that we now have come to associate with him and said, look, Maazi, you think we don't know you, but we know you. We know that you have preached the gospel as a witness, a Jehovah's Witness before. We also know that you have engaged the political space, both as a scholar and as a civil society organizer. So you will be fine. I then requested that he gives me a topic. Again, he countered and said, speak as the Lord has led you. So today I ask the Spirit of God to speak through me and to touch the heart of his people here and gathered in Jesus' name. The topic of today's Synod lecture is what I have called, as an Igbo man, Nzube Chukwu. God is a thinker. Development as a godly mandate. I will take it again. Nzube Chukwu. God is a thinker. Development as a godly mandate. And I will immediately start today's lecture with a verse from the Bible. If you have your Bibles, you can open it. If you don't, no problem, I'll read it. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 55, from verse 8 to 9, it reads in parts. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Throughout the Bible, God is portrayed as a thinker and a planner. The nature of God as a thinker is deeply embedded in the biblical account of creation, showcasing divine wisdom, intentionality, and purpose. Genesis 1 gives us a glimpse of the mind of God, highlighting his ability to bring forth a well thought out, structured creation where everything was deemed good. As creationists, we are introduced to an intelligent designer or a developer in Genesis who developed the magnificence and awe-inspiring beauty we call the universe out of nothing or from a void. This divine act of creation reflects God's perfect thinking qualities, demonstrating that development is not just a human pursuit, but an act with celestial underpinnings. The divine thought behind creation is not just seen in the order of events, but also in the purpose behind them. Humanity is not an afterthought, but the culmination of God's creative work. In Genesis chapter 1 verse 26, God says, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. This declaration reveals God's intention to create humans as stewards of his creation, charged with the responsibility of overseeing the earth. From the very beginning, therefore, God's thinking has centered on the development and flourishing of humanity, both as individuals and as a collective society. Therefore, as human beings created in the image of God, we have been endowed with the capacity to think, to innovate, and develop as part of our divine nature. Chineke anyị kere anyị n'oyiyi ya, anyị gakwa na-eche echiche, na-arụsi ọrụ ike iji ṅomie ya. Ọkwa eziokwu? The prophet Amos wrote that the one who forms the mountains and creates the wind also reveals his thoughts in Amos chapter 4 verse 13. As beings created in the image of God, humanity is endowed with the capacity to plan and create reflecting God's own nature. The nature of God as a thinker and creator places a responsibility on humanity to imitate his intentionality in our lives. That is why in Colossians chapter 3 verse 23 he says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. This instruction therefore calls believers to approach every aspect of work, relationship, personal growth, and societal contributions with the same thoughtfulness and dedication that God displayed in creation. In Romans chapter 12 verse 2, Paul urges Christians to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, a reminder that human development begins with the transformation of our thinking. In today's modern discourse, societal development is often framed in secular terms as economic growth, technological innovation, or social infrastructure. However, when viewed through the lens or prism of the scripture, societal progress takes a spiritual dimension. Just as God's creation was designed to flourish in harmony and order, human societies are meant to be spaces where justice, peace, and righteousness prevail. In fact, the Bible in Isaiah 9 verse 7 speaks of the Messiah, saying, of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from time on, even forever. This passage therefore connects the reign of Christ, a time of ultimate societal flourishing, with the principles of justice and righteousness. As such, any effort to develop society that disregards these values is ultimately flawed. God's thoughts, as revealed in his word, provide a blueprint for what societal progress should look like. Governments and leaders are called to rule justly, reflecting the righteous governance of God. Citizens are called to contribute to the common good, living out the virtues of compassion and love for neighbor. In this sense, societal development is not a secular pursuit, but a spiritual one, deeply tied to the wisdom and plan of God. Governments derive their authorities from God to promote goods and restrain evil. This mandate is expressly stated in Romans chapter 13, verse 1 to 7. And elsewhere, Paul urges that prayers be made for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life. So Paul therefore understood the need for Christian participation in government. In Genesis, the command to fill the earth points to humanity's responsibility to populate the earth. And the command to subdue it does not imply exploitation or domination for selfish purposes, but rather a form of leadership that aligns with God's righteousness and justice. It implies that humans must act with intentionality, care, and responsibility, managing both the natural and social environments in ways that are sustainable and just. What then is the connection between religion and development? We will bridge that gap now. Religion is the basis upon which social trust is built in many communities, especially among African communities. Through religion, there are emotional linkages between people, their identity-seeking behavior, and the key role of shared partnership relationships. With religion defying secularism in the developed and developed nations, it is imperative that religion must be taken as a serious resource and partner in development planning and execution of the government's policies and agenda. Besides the profound influence that religion has on politics, it can also impact social transformation and economic development. Like Max Weber said and observed, religion, particularly the Protestant Reformation, was partly responsible for the rise of capitalism. Hence, the social influence of religion cannot be overemphasized. Religion provides a moral and ethical foundation that can constrain individuals and social policies. Values such as justice, compassion, community support, and fairness are emphasized in many African religions. In countries like Senegal and parts of northern Nigeria, Islamic principles of social justice have shaped the community behavior therein. Missionaries and religious groups were among the first to establish schools across the continent in Africa. I just heard in the Synod briefing that the Diocese of Ebu is actually responsible for the Ebu Girls College, if I'm not mistaken. Exactly. The Anglican Communion and Catholic Church, for example, operates thousands of hospitals and clinics across Africa, particularly in countries like Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, and Kenya. In a country like Nigeria, for example, where about 98.7% of its population practice either Christianity or Islam, it is indisputable that religion plays a significant role in the lives of its citizens. Since Nigeria attained independence in 1960, the country has continued to contend with many challenges in nation building. Despite the country's oil wealth, it is still one of the poorest countries in the world, where 1 in 3 children are out of school, about 10.2 million children at primary school level, and 8.1 million children at secondary school level. Youths have no access to quality education, and majority are unemployed. Educational institutions are without enough infrastructure, inadequate access to safe drinking water, good roads, and standard health services. Also, an array of problems such as insecurity, kidnappings, armed robbery, as well as unsteady electric power supply have been crippling the political, economic, and social life. Many have attributed the cause of these challenges to a lack of good governance at all levels, whether during the military or democratic dispensation. China today observed that the failure of Nigeria as a nation is not in the system, but rather in the caliber of persons entrusted with the management of the nation's vast human and material resources. Nigeria can be best seen in comparison with its pre-independence contemporaries like Singapore, Malaysia, or even South Korea. These are called the Asian tigers. Before becoming an oil-dependent country, Nigeria's foreign earnings were primarily based on agriculture, with the export of produce like cocoa, cotton, palm oil, rubber, groundnuts. But for the Asian tigers, agriculture was also a key component of their development in the early stages. So South Korea invested 30% of aid from the United States into agriculture, making it easier for agriculture to be done on a large scale. Similarly, Taiwan was an exporter of rice, sugar, and pineapple. Currently, South Korea's GDP is around $1.6 trillion, making it the 12th largest economy in the world. In comparison, Nigeria's GDP is approximately 397.3 billion, ranking it number 32nd. This means that South Korea's economy is indeed over 4 times larger than Nigeria's. The economic trajectories of Singapore and Nigeria are also strikingly different due to factors such as leadership, governance, economic policies, and resource management. While Singapore has transformed from a developing nation into a global economic powerhouse, Nigeria has faced several challenges in achieving similar sustained growth despite its vast natural resources. The leadership of Singapore prioritized education, industrialization, and infrastructural development. The government created business-friendly policies to attract foreign direct investment, becoming a major player in manufacturing, shipping, and financial services. We can talk about the other Asian tigers. You know the story. Let us bring it home, though. The southeast geopolitical zone of Nigeria has arguably become the worst region since the independence of Nigeria. The region sadly has been bedeviled over time by governments so corrupt that funds meant to develop the region have had little or no impact in the region. The developmental efforts in the zone have been so ineffective that the whole zone is in shambles. In addition to being led by a set of elites that are ready to sacrifice the people of the region for their own personal ambitions. Let us take Imo State, for example, since we are in Imo State. Imo State, which is centrally located in the heart of the southeast, is characterized by high unemployment, youth unemployment, failing infrastructure, and security crisis. The crisis of insecurity is a product of several years of monumental neglect and deprivation suffered by the people of the state. This has resulted in widespread poverty, excruciating hardship, complete lack of basic socio-economic infrastructures, dislocated societal values and cohesion, ecological destruction, and high rate of unemployment amongst our youths. This environment of anger, frustration, and abject poverty has also precipitated terrible cases of violent and deadly security schisms in Imo State. Agriculture is a major occupation of the rural population in Imo State, while commerce, industry, and services constitute much of the economic activity of the urban dwellers. The people of Imo State are very entrepreneurial and largely dominate the informal pharmaceutical drug market in Nigeria. Aside from natural resource endowments, Imo State has immense potential for tourism too. The state also has potential for agro-based and agro-allied industries, chemical and petrochemical industries, non-metallical mineral-based industries, engineering and metallic industries. Like most of the states in the southeast, Imo State shares in the paradox of many rich people in a poor state. This is because the businesses of the rich and elites are outside of the state. Indeed, most of the rich Imo citizens are mere visitors in their state. Much of the skilled workforce are in the diaspora. Imo State is now a net exporter of skilled workforce to the rest of the country and the world. The Imo economy, in layman's terms, has been in consistent decline since 2020 and is currently adjudged the worst performing in the southeast. Imo State survived 5% on federal allocation, and 15% on internally generated revenue. The state's domestic debt, L.G.A, has increased by 40.7% on a yearly basis from 120 billion as at the end of 2020 to 210.39 billion by June 2022. Ke 2024 agalati be ya. The educational landscape in Imo State, Nigeria, in its public primary and secondary school, has been facing significant challenges. When compared with past decades, the overall quality of education in Imo State has shown a negative trend. The neglect and near collapse of the education system in Imo State casts a shadow of uncertainty over the future, fostering hopelessness, joblessness, and insecurity. The state education system is suffering from a loss of confidence, primarily among the political and elite class. Over 95% of these elites opt to educate their children in private primary schools and secondary schools at home and abroad, including leading to a lack of serious policy discussions about education in Imo State. Most government schools you see are underfunded, with overcrowded classrooms, mostly attended by children of the poor. We can't even begin to talk about the deplorable treatment of teachers in the state. The irritating irony is that most of these public servants and politicians that have destroyed these public institutions benefited from the public system, from a public education system in the past. And to further show their disdain for the suffering masses, an investigation of the ownership of these private schools will reveal that many of them are owned by those that have rendered public schools, thereby forcing you, the poor masses, and me to patronize their schools. A case of robbing Peter to pay Paul. Despite having a high literacy rate, the educational progress in Imo State has been stagnating, with little commitment to improvement. The deepening crisis in the education sector is further exacerbated by the political elite's lack of focus on the more important things, rather a focus on elections and politics, often at the expense of education. The rich and middle classes, by sending their children to private schools, both domestically and abroad, are creating a widening gap between the poor and the rich, thus perpetuating inequality. Education, which once used to be a great equalizer, is no longer serving its purpose effectively in Imo State. Over the years, the state government's budgetary allocation to education has been below UNESCO's benchmark of 26% of annual budget to education. In 2024, for instance, Imo State's government's allocation to education is 42.23 billion, which is less than 10% of the state's approved budget of 592 billion. I will argue today that development is embedded in education, and a society that aims to develop cannot pay lip service to the education of its citizens. In fact, the education of a people is an ecclesiastical duty that must not be neglected. It is noteworthy that even our sacred texts as Christians, and even the ones of Muslims, emphasize the importance of education. Let us turn to the Bible again. In Proverbs chapter 1, verse 5, the wise King Solomon said, "A wise man will hear and will increase learning. A man of understanding shall attend unto wise counsels." In Proverbs 9, verse 9, he further says, "Give instruction to a wise man, and he will yet be wiser. Teach," keywords, teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. Talking about education. And in Colossians, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, the Bible itself tells us clearly that even the Bible is a tool of education. When it says, all scriptures, it is inspired of God and beneficial for teaching. All scriptures is inspired of God and beneficial for teaching, for reproving, for setting things straight, for disciplining in righteousness, so that the man of God may be fully competent, completely equipped for every good work. The holy book of our brothers, the Muslims, even makes it more clearer. In Surah Al-Alaq, the first revelation revealed to the Prophet Muhammad was an injunction to read 3 times, Ikra, 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 which means read, read, read. Read in the name of your Lord, who created man from a clot of congealed blood. Read, and your Lord is most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know. So consequently, every discerning person would assume that since leaders are expected to be rational beings who actually put some thinking into policies, education will take a primacy in Imo State. But to the chagrin of many, and in a brazen display of official rascality, devoid of proper thinking, I would say, the Imo State Library was demolished to pave way for a magnificent recreational center and I think a church building or so in the 21st century. What made the demolition of the state library more condemnable and an aberration is that the leader of that administration wrote to Dogman's house on the back of his educational philanthropy and constantly declared his commitment to education. Shall we also look at the health sector? The same old story. So several discussions have been dominated by arguments in favor and against with regards to the role of the church in state affairs. The discourse has been of interest to many people. Should the church be involved in politics there and there? I argue that the church has always been immersed in politics from time immemorial, from the Roman Empire to the medieval era and to the present day. In fact, in the New Testament, the word ecclesia, which is used to refer to the church, actually means a political assembly, a political association, or a gathering in ancient Greek. So the separation of the church and the state, or the separation of secular and religious power, has not always been this clear-cut. The Holy Book itself is full of this intersection between the church, power struggles, and secular politics. So the church in Nigeria has played major roles in positively affecting the culture, socio-economic and socio-political and educational life of the people. The church has the responsibility of saying no to bad government whenever a government policy becomes bad. Though government has been responsible for introducing some policies that are weakening the economy, the church must speak out when such policies are passed. So the church has to speak. It must ensure that such policies are reversed and replaced with better ones. It is also the responsibility of the church to educate the congregation on civil matters. It is explicitly stated in Matthew 22, verse 21. There are church members here who either do not know their civic responsibilities or do not take it very seriously. The church has a role to play in ensuring that Christians and the society generally live up to their civic obligations. It should encourage and insist that everyone that is of voting age should have a voter's card and that they must be ready to participate in elections so as not to be disenfranchised. It is important to get members to elect the right people into political offices. The church, to a large degree, should ensure that the state also fulfills its rightful task. The church has a role in helping the state to fulfill God's expectations by reminding all of those expectations. Many of today's national leaders and political leaders belong to either a church or a mosque, and some of them even claim to be pastors. So sometimes sermons should be targeted at these people to consider the general good instead of their selfish interest. When this is done, this could prick their consciences and trigger them into doing what is right. These revolutionary sermons, I call them, should be across every denomination, making it irrelevant if the political class or the political actor chooses to leave one church and go to another. For development to be sustained and meaningful, it must be anchored on godly leadership. Leaders who align their actions with God's mandate of justice, righteousness, and service to humanity. In societies where the righteous lead, what does the Bible say in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 2? It says, when the righteous thrive, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. This kind of leadership fosters environments where creativity, innovation, and human potential can be fully realized. To fulfill the divine mandate of righteous development, the church must begin by raising a new generation of leaders who reflect the character of Christ. These leaders, like Christ himself, must embody humility, putting the needs of others before their own. They must lead with integrity, standing for truth even when it is costly. Development is not just about increase in physical capital. It requires changes both in ways of thinking and in the social, political, cultural, and economic situations of society. The development of Imo State, for example, requires incorporating the principles of integrity, stewardship, justice, and compassion into policy making and governance. By prioritizing ethical leadership, responsible resource management, social justice, and human capital, Imo State can overcome the economic challenges and embark on a path of sustainable growth. Positive thinking encourages long-term planning, innovation, peace, and accountability. The state government is encouraged to create policies that support innovation, entrepreneurship, and small businesses. This could involve setting up innovation hubs, providing small business loans, and reducing bureaucratic red tapes that stifles new businesses. A major hindrance to development in Imo State is lack of accountability and weak enforcement of the rule of law. Strengthening institutions like the judiciary, anti-corruption agencies, and law enforcement will ensure that development projects are not derailed by corruption or inefficiency. In conclusion, God's perfect creation was a product of his divine thoughts, and he has passed on the responsibility for development to humanity. We are called to mirror this intentionality in how we live, grow, and lead. Whether we are developing our character, our communities, or our world, we are participating in a divine process that began at the foundation of the world. Since we are made in the image of God, all the attributes of God should be foremost in our minds as they determine our identity. We are thinkers because God is a thinker. But what sort of thinkers are we? So to end this discourse, I will crave the indulgence of my Lord Bishop and your permission to ask everyone here in this church to please turn to your neighbor and ask him of her, brethren. Go ahead. Look at your neighbor and ask him of her, brethren, will you be a thinker? Brethren, will you be a thinker? The time has come for us to be thinkers. Okay, ruler. Thank you and God bless you all.